you to walk our Lenten journey. Help us to be open to you, open to learning who we are and whose we are. Through these women whose lives we hear about on these videos, may we learn something that strikes our soul, that we can point to, that yes, I'm like that. Yes, I could be like that. And give us the grace we need for that. Amen. Well, good afternoon and welcome to EWHP's sixth and last presentation of Women Worth Knowing. The Episcopal Women's History Project was founded to remember the women that have meant so much to the Church by listening to their stories, writing them down, and using new technologies to record their lives. We invite you to join EWHP and become part of this exciting adventure of remembering women's lives. Robin Sumners today will tell us about her Aunt Gertrude Sumners, who was a missionary to Japan. Robin is presently the communications officer for EWHP. Robin grew up in an Episcopal family that was very active in the church. She has a doctorate in education and public health. Robin started a highly successful doll manufacturing company, which included for her designing those dolls. She continued ministry in the Episcopal Church, choir, Christian education, and being part of the women of the church. Robin lives with her husband, Charlie, who is an Episcopal priest in Austin. Now I ask Robin Sumners to tell us about her Aunt Gertrude Sumners, missionary to Japan. Robin?
And then do this. Now what do I do? Play from start? Okay. All right, how's that? Gertrude Sumners was a missionary for the Episcopal Church. And she had a statement that she made that was pretty important for her, which was, fortune tellers would tell me that I will never know enough and will always be studying. They also say that I would also feel my dependence on God. I hope both of these prophecies are really true. I'm going to tell you a story about her. It was a cold enough Christmas day to put on leggings, coats, hats, and gloves. The year was 1947. Santa Claus had come, and I had a new doll buggy. My cousin Phil, who was almost the same years as me, I was 4, he got a train set. This was a very exciting Christmas day because our Aunt Gert was coming to visit. We had never seen her before, but we knew a lot about her. We were waiting outside watching for the car that would bring her. She was coming from a long way, from Houston to the city of Lubbock. We were on the plains, cold winds, miserable sandstorms, and hardly any trees. Gert had been living in Japan as a missionary for the Episcopal Church, but she came home because of the World War, the war we called World War II. Aunt Gert was one of my grandmother's sisters. Including my grandmother, there were 5 sisters. Aunt Gert was 4th in the age of the sisters. There were 4 boys as well, and my grandmother, Roberta, had pretty much raised the 5 younger kids. I knew most of the 9 Sumner's children, but the most magical one was Gert. She had been a missionary teacher in Japan for 9 years before the war started. Imagining living in another country was exotic, but in Japan, that to me was scary. After all, In my world, we had been at war with Japan. Even at age 4, the idea of living in a country that had been at war was mostly a nightmare. Gert had gone to Japan in 1931, but when this war was beginning, the church called her home. On this Christmas Day, there were a lot of things to learn. Gertrude, missionary in Japan, had come home, meaning that Japan was not home, and it turned out that that was not true. For her, Japan was home. For her Japanese, Japan was an ancient civilization living on a group of islands. The beauty of the language of the country, the artwork, the people, and the culture captured the imagination of this very intelligent woman, and she embraced Japan and the people who lived there. The Christmas that she came to visit, I really believed that she came visit to just see me. She told us stories about Japan. She laughed and taught us about the ceremony of tea and the meaning of ceremony of purity, tranquility, respect, and harmony, words I didn't even know. She kept us all laughing about her adventures. She seemed to me that Christmas was a fairy godmother, and then the most amazing thing happened at all. She brought me a doll. I might have been only 4 years old, but I loved dolls. My new Christmas doll buggy was full of dolls. Some of them belonged to my aunts Carolyn and Cack. Some of them were mine. But Aunt Gert brought me a very special doll that Christmas. The doll was a little girl, looking very much like the pictures I had seen of Japan children. When the package had been handed me to open, I found this beautiful doll inside, and the box amazed me. Aunt Gert took her out of the box and carefully wrapped the tissue around her. She stood this incredible doll on the coffee table and told me to look into her sleeves. Tucked in her sleeves were hairpins adorned with chains and coins, but most of all, there was a tiny little book full of pieces of rice paper. And on one of these, there was a message. My name is Sachiko. Please love me as I have been loved. Gert told me that Sachiko was a very old doll. To me, that meant she was at least 100. Anything old had to be 100. Sachiko was an antique. Her name meant child of bliss or happiness. Sachiko was a gift to me to bring me happiness. I was enchanted most by the message. Please love me as I have been loved. And that was the beginning of this story. Aunt Gert's parents, Charles Abram Sumners and Callie Roberta Clement, the Sumners family was historically Presbyterian. The Clements were historically Episcopalians. When Callie Roberta agreed to marry Charles Abram, if they were married in her church only, he said, I'll go wherever Callie goes, and he became an Episcopalian. Callie Roberta was known as Bertie. She was a gifted musician, and she was full of life. Charlie was an attorney. He was the mayor of Kyoto, and later the county judge and the superintendent of schools simultaneously. The Sumners had 9 children. Lois in 1992. In 1894 was John James. Clement Peter in 1895. Catherine Roberta, my grandmother, in 1897. Susie Story in 1899. Gertrude in 1900. Oops, I have to go back to, sorry, didn't mean to go quite that soon. There were twins, Charles and Thomas, born in 1903, and Rachel in 1905. All the children were baptized at Grace Church, and the older children were confirmed by the Right Reverend George Herbert Consolving, who served as Bishop of Texas for 35 years. Every one of the Sumners family were active in church work at Grace Church as soon as they were older. Not long after Rachel was born, Judge Sumners contracted dengue fever. He was very ill for a period of time, and the illness caused him to have nephritis, a disease that can destroy the kidneys. He was sent to mineral wells where the waters were used for healing, but ultimately the judge died at age of 42. Here was the story of his death in the Kyoto Daily Record. On April 1st, 1908, the silent reaper took to the eternal home this beloved husband and father, who had become afflicted with nephritis with complications of dengue fever. The funeral was from the Episcopal Church, with the Masons, the Knights of Pythias, the woodmen, and the choir for firemen attended in bodies. The Knights of Pythias gave a stained glass window telling the story of a knight and his companion in honor of the judge. For many years, the window was lost, and the window was returned to its space in the building not very long ago, in the building that is now the Chisholm Trail Museum. There is a thing in honor of him. It's really quite a beautiful window. Bertie Sumners lived for another 38 years. The children from ages 16 to 3 when their father died. The 9 children were deeply devoted to the Episcopal Church, not only to Grace Church. As they grew, the older boys, and Lois and the older, took care of the young the things their mother needed, especially the finances. You know, in those days, there wasn't any life insurance. There wasn't anything to protect a woman who died who had a lot of children. James, the oldest, moved to Cleburne, where he established an automobile business. Think of that, automobile business in 1910. Isn't that when cars started? And in 1915, he moved his mother and all the children to Cleburne. The story goes that when the family left their hometown, the entire community went to see the family on the train. School was let out, businesses were closed, and everyone waved and cheered and wept at their departure. The legend has it that the family cow also traveled with the family, with James riding in the baggage car to take care of the cow. At this point, Gertrude was still in high school. She finished this school in Cleburne, graduating in 1919. The youngest of the Sumners children, Gertrude, the twins Charles and Thomas, and Rachel, were very committed to the youth programs, the Holy Comforter Episcopal Church there, where they attended. Roberta and Sue had finished high school before the move to Cleburne, and then they had gone to what was called the Women's College in Denton, which became Texas Women's University School. All of the girls in the Sumners family were educated at the women's school and more. Shortly after the family moved to Cleburne, the young men of town began to notice the beautiful Sumner girls. Did I go too fast? Wait, where am I? I have to go back when I went too fast. Hold on. Is this 11? I guess it is. Okay, sorry about that. I'll go back. Shortly after the family moved to Cleburne, the young men began to notice the beautiful Sumners girls. Scott was taking Sue Sumners for a ride with his buckboard and horse. Scott Bledsoe was a truly tall, blonde, blue-eyed, handsome guy. When he came to pick up Sue, Roberta was standing outside. He realized he was courting the wrong girl. And the next day, he took Roberta for a ride on his buckboard. Roberta Sumners married William Scott Bledsoe in Cleburne in 1916. The oldest sister, Lois, met Henry Mobley, another tall, dark, and handsome man, and married him on May 12th in 1917. Lois and Henry moved to Dallas, where his business thrived. They had 2 children, and their younger son, Charles, died while he was a student at the University of Texas. James, the oldest son, after many ventures that did well, he went to Galveston, where he founded Seaboard Finance Company. In Galveston, he met Emily Burgess. By that time, the twins had actually gone to seminary and been ordained, and he did their wedding. Clement Peter, called Clem, was the 3rd born child of the family. He was a banker. He volunteered for the Army in World War II and in the service for 24 months. Afterward, he went to South Texas School of Law and became a lawyer. Since Robert had taken away Scott Bledsoe, Sue held on to a new, dashing, tall, and handsome guy she met in high school, James Slaughter. They graduated in 1916 and were married in Cleburne in 1922. Sue, who had been an active member of the Episcopal Church, was a committed volunteer for the many tasks of the Church of the Incarnation in Dallas. She twice attended General Convention as a delegate from the Diocese of Dallas. For those who are not aware, General Convention is kind of where the voice and vote of what's happening in the church. Meanwhile, Gertrude, we did go back one, hold on. She finished high school immediately and enrolled in the College of Industrial Arts. Whoops, I don't know where that came from. There we go. So this is a school for young women to gain higher education. She was called by friends and teachers to attend there, and she went 1919 through 1920 in the summer. She majored in fine and applied arts with an education to receive a teacher's certificate. He immediately began teaching. 1920 to 1921, she taught the primary grades in Island Grove District of School in Johnson County. In 1921 to 22, she taught in the El Paso schools as a teacher first grade, teaching the Mexican children. She spoke fluent Spanish. In the meantime, Bertie moved her youngest children to Austin so they could attend the University of Texas. Charles and Thomas, the twins, were great students and also great tennis players. The boys were active in the Episcopal Church on the Texas campus, and they spent much of their time at the diocesan Camp Allen. They caught the attention of the suffragan Bishop of Texas, the Right Reverend Clinton Quinn. These twins were outgoing and gregarious and loved the Episcopal Church. Bishop Quinn made a deal to the twins and their friend Larry Brown. He would give them a car, a 1925 Ford, to drive to Virginia to go to seminary. If they finished the 3 years of seminary and didn't like the idea of being a priest, he would give them jobs that would be the salary that they would have had if they'd not gone to seminary. Whoops, I missed. I'm not going. That's the Mexican kids. Sorry about that. Okay. They had never been out of state before, so they said, why not? The three guys loved the seminary, loved the church, and they went on their way to a life of service in the Episcopal Church. Rachel, the baby, this is Rachel in the middle here, attended high school in Cleburne and then went to the University of Texas to get a bachelor's degree. In between sessions, Rachel and her mother spent a winter in Denver. I really don't understand why they would go there in the winter, but they did. During that winter, Rachel met a young attorney named Richard Watson. They fell in love, but Rachel, who had been to Windham House, or was on her way there, she said, I will only marry you if you become a priest. So Richard went off to Virginia Seminary, graduated in 1929. Rachel went to Windham House at the same time. They were married in Dallas at the Church of the Incarnation. And ultimately, Richard became the Dean of St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle, and then the Bishop of Utah, which at the time was a missionary district. Under Bishop Watson, the missionary district became the thriving Diocese of Utah. Interestingly enough, I have a relative who is now the dean of that cathedral again. As an aside, both Richard and Rachel's ashes are interred in the cathedral in Salt Lake. In the meantime, Gertrude was a brilliant educator and an adventurer of the family. She was willing to travel and was always ready to learn new things. She returned to further education in 1922 to 1924, enrolling in the University of Texas and working part-time as a slide artist, and she got a degree in architecture. In 1924 to 1926, as the head of an American department in a school, the Colegia Maria Josefina Hooker, she was there, and she again used her Spanish fluently. In 1927, J.V. Taylor of the Taylor Ranch in Brewster County, Texas, persuaded Gertrude to be a private teacher for the Taylor's children. A story that runs through the family is that a local rancher in Brewster started to court Gert, and she fled as far away as she could go to New York City. She entered Windham House there, where she studied more about the Episcopal Church and the teaching of Christianity. Windham House was in the Greenwich Village area of New York City and was established to a place for women who wished to serve the Episcopal Church, a comfortable place to live while gaining the skills needed to serve the church. Windham House was supported by the United Thank Offering. Many of the women earned a certification as a director of religious education, awarded by Windham House, while at the same time they earned a Master of Degrees at several different universities. Gertrude attended Columbia to receive her master's degree. She was then 31 years of age, and promptly she went to Japan as a missionary. She had become interested in the work women in Japan were doing, trying to gain the right to vote and to have a voice in their own lives. Women had been unable to accomplish this, but education for women was urgent. The concept of teaching Japanese girls caught Gertrude's imagination, and she applied for a United Thank Offering grant to go to Japan to teach at St. Agnes Girls' School. The Cathedral of St. Agnes had been built in 1895 and was one of the oldest Christian buildings in Japan. Think about that. Everything else in Japan is ancient, and there's an Episcopal cathedral that's been there less than 100 years, and it's the oldest Christian thing in the country. During those years, Gert was teaching girls at the school English, history, the English Bible, and Bible classes in Japanese. She wanted to master the Japanese language, so we recruited a group of Kyoto girls at the school to teach her. She loved the country, its ancient history, its growing women's movement, its beauty, and its traditions. At the time she arrived in Japan, there were already wars going on in the countries around. Japan wanted to control the Asian continent. There were a lot of skirmishes. In 1934, Gert was granted a furlough, a time to go home or to travel, much like a sabbatical. She opted to travel in the Far East, again, the adventurer, places difficult to reach. She traveled to Korea by the channel from the end of Honshu, traveling overnight in an open barge. She then traveled to Seoul to train by Seoul, and then to the Diamond Mountains, which are now not even available for people to see. She traveled through Mongolia and arrived in Peking, now called Beijing, and she spent a month there where she loved the sights, the food, the shopping, and the people. Gert's departure from Japan in 1940 was sudden, as the world was gaining everywhere. She was simply told, "Come home." There was no passenger ship available for immediate departure, so this brave woman boarded a tramp steamer that was to sail to America. There was one space where a woman could be safe, and the captain was gracious and took care of her. Her travels, crossing various oceans and seas and stopping in many ports, caused her to leave one steamer after another, never on a ship intended to have a woman on board. Always she had a captain who was thoughtful, and as they headed home. The family believes it took her more than a year to arrive home, though he did arrive in New York safely. While she waited for time to go back to Japan, she was employed by the United States of the Office of Censorship in San Antonio. In 1943, she took up teaching again in a junior high school in Houston. During this time, her own mother, Callie Roberta, died in Dallas while she was traveling to visit Roberta, the fourth child who lived in Lubbock. Callie Sumners was 74 when she died. Judge Sumners had been buried in Quero, and Callie was buried beside him. Callie had been living with Tom and Doris, her brother and sister-in-law, for a time. In 1947, Kurt joined the faculty of the University of Houston, teaching interior design, freshman design, and history of architecture. These positions, she also taught Sunday school, helped with other events while helping her brother. The Reverend Thomas Sumner, he created a whole new congregation and church, St. John the Divine in Houston. St. John the Divine at one time was the largest congregation in the country and is still one of the largest. While waiting to return to Japan, the school she loved, she lived with her brother. She also spent time with the other twin brother, the Reverend Charles Sumners, the rector of St. David's Episcopal Church in Austin. Charles and Tom had married sisters, Virginia and Doris, in a double wedding in 1940. She enjoyed visiting the three Sumners boys, Charles, Thomas, and Robert, born in 1941, 44, and 48. All the while, she was waiting to return to Japan. Charles Sumners became rector of St. David's Episcopal Church, a vital church in the heart of Austin and just blocks from the Texas Capitol building. He was at St. David's at 36 years, and for many years, he was the chaplain of the Texas Senate. 13 years after the war, Gertrude returned to St. Agnes School in Kyoto as a teacher of English and Bible. St. Agnes had become a high school and college during the time Gert was gone, and she found herself challenged by more of the Japanese language and new readings for each character symbolic in their writing. She mattered 400 of 1,800 symbols so that she could read a newspaper easily. When she left the school in 1940, there were 600 students. She returned to a school of 1,500 students or more. St. Agnes had 3 full-time American teachers when she left. On her return, she was the only American teacher there. On her arrival, Japanese did not want foreigners in the area where she had been living before. The house where she had lived had burned down during the war, but there was land that the church owned. They gave her $4,500 to build a house and another $500 to build a world around it. With her own funds, she built a fireplace and created the house. She designed her house herself. Remember, she was an architect. With the help of a builder who found someone who handled the language issues between Japanese and English. Her home became a place where guests gathered, and she was the diocesan hostess for all travelers. The Right Reverend Maisie Shepherd loved to tease her as she demanded that he remove his shoes in her house. She would point to the house slippers on her feet and say, "I cannot wear shoes in the house anymore." When Aunt Gert was on the furlough to the U.S., she came to visit. She gave a presentation to my EYC group. Anybody remember what that was? Episcopal Youth. After the session, she told us about being a missionary. After the session, she told my grandmother and me a very scary story about her life in Japan. She had been people to her home for a Bible study one evening. She had a weekly Bible study in her home. There were various people, 2 priests and some other guests. 2 Buddhists attacked her home, broke in, and 2 of her guests were killed. She was very frightened, and she was grateful she had not been harmed at all. The tension with the Christians in Kyoto was difficult. There were very few Christians in Kyoto. During these remarkable years of my Aunt Gert, I was growing up. She never forgot to send me special gifts when I needed them. I didn't know how she knew that. Always there were dolls and toys and really interesting mysteries. There were very special gifts, most of which I still keep close with me. Of course, there was Sachiko. Aunt Gert knew of my love of dolls, and when I was in the 1st grade, she sent me some small dolls and a story, a book that told the story of Girls' Day, a day when all the little girls in Japan put their dolls on display for everyone to see. They are wonderful, special symbolic dolls for Japanese girls. I didn't have them, but I had the idea of Girls' Day was magical. When I was in the 2nd grade, living in Santa Fe, and on the big day, March 3rd, I set up my girls for Girls' Day. At the foot of my bed, I built a set of steps with boxes, covered it with a baby blanket, soft and easy to drape, and then I put all my dolls on display. I invited my mother and my little brother to come see Girls' Day and what it was all about in Japan on March 3rd. Sachiko was at the top of the steps in the center. Some of the smaller dolls from Japan and the baby dolls I had were still dressed the very best. To this day, I have a Girls' Day that is always present in my house. So on the left is a celebration in Japan. On my right is my Girls' Day, which I keep. I don't keep it only on March. I keep it on all the time. In the 6th grade, Aunt Gert sent me a Hakata doll. She is the doll maker. Aunt Gert enjoyed my love of dolls and that I was frequently making clothes for my dolls and rag dolls for my little sister and special occasion outfits for my special dolls. It was a promise of sorts because in my professional life, I did become a doll maker. Robin Wood's Dolls became the 2nd largest doll manufacturer in the country. And on the hang tag of every girl created, there was a statement that said, "Please love me as I have been loved." The message that came when I was very small, and I held on to it. This was made clear so that the doll collectors would know that each doll was made with love. When I graduated from high school, Aunt Gert sent me 5 yards of exquisite white gold silk to make my graduation dress. I designed the dress, much like something a Greek goddess would wear. My mother helped me create it, and I wore it for graduation and many years later. It was truly a lovely dress, classic enough to never get out of time, and I was fascinated by the idea that the worms spun the light. So Aunt Gert told me those stories. Then when I was getting married, Aunt Gert sent me a strand of Mikimoto pearls to wear on my wedding day. The pearls were small, perfect, and elegant. I wore them on my wedding day and for many years and for many special events. And then when my own daughter got married, I gave Aunt Gert's pearls to her to wear on her wedding day and afterward to wear until there was someone she wanted to give them on. Whoops, sorry. Too fast. Find my way here. As a wedding gift, she sent us a Japanese screen, a bayur, a windscreen, a lovely folding screen with a painting of cranes on a lake surrounded by flowers and trees. It has graced our home for many years. The screen took a long time to travel to us, and we've often wondered where it went before it arrived. The joke was it took 4 years to travel to us. It was meant to be for starting college. In fact, it was a present for the wedding. Gertrude Sumner was an amazing person. She was fearless. She knew that her calling was to tell the story of the Christianity to the girls in Japan without taking away their culture and their history. Somehow, she managed to achieve this for more than 35 years. Japan was her home, but her health was failing and her vision was failing. She had cornea surgery done by a well-known Japanese doctor, Dr. Tukashihara, head of the medical school in Osaka, Japan. For help for this delicate surgery, he asked a doctor who knew well from San Francisco, who came to assist for the surgery. He never allowed her to pay a cent. But after the difficulty with her eyes, the Episcopal Church told her it was time for her to retire. Her pension from the Episcopal Church was not enough for a person to stay in Japan. Gert left her beautiful Japan in 1969 and settled in Austin, Texas. She had a lovely apartment. She had many Japanese friends in Austin and served as a member of a hospitality committee for the Japanese studying at the University of Texas. Gertrude Sumners, Master of Arts, Master of Science, died on May 1st, 1978 in Austin, Texas. Here are some of the quotes from the obituary in the Living Church magazine. Gertrude Sumners was a retired missionary of the Episcopal Church, having taught in Mexico City at the Hooker School in the late 20s prior to teaching at Hine, Women's College, St. Agnes School, Kyoto, Japan, from 1931 to 1941. Miss Sumners returned to Texas when World War II declared, where she lived in Houston, where was a member of the faculty of the School of Architecture at the University of Houston. At the request of St. Agnes School, Kyoto the church sent Miss Sumners back to Japan in 1953, where she again joined the faculty as a teacher and a member of the administration of the college. She remained in Kyoto until her retirement in 1969, when she moved to Austin. The year before she returned to Texas, the Emperor of Japan honored her by awarding the Fifth Order of Sacred Treasures for the contribution she had made to the education of women in Japan. Gertrude is buried next to her parents in Quero, the place of her birth. In 1968, this information was announced to the Kyoto News. To celebrate the 100th anniversary of Meiji, the Japanese government announced on October 22, 1968, the decoration of 5 foreigners who will receive the Fifth Order of the Sacred Treasure. Miss Gertrude Sumners of Kyoto area is one of them who will receive this award. Miss Sumner is the executive director and professor at Hainan Women's College in Kyoto. This is pretty funny. She is a 67-year-old American lady, although she looks healthy and beautiful and not over 50, maybe. Her association with Japan began in 1931 when she came to Japan as a lady missionary from the United States Episcopal Church. She began a teacher at Hainan Women's College. She returned to the USA before World War II and came back to Japan in 1953. She taught English at Hainan College and became part of its management. Although she was awarded this honor for her long life in education and college management, Miss Sumners said in eloquent Japanese, "I did not render any distinction service. I feel ashamed." Very traditional Japan. However, Mr. Saki, president of the college, praised her. Professor Sumners is a proud Texan. After the war, private colleges were financially hard-pressed. While we were planning to expand the school, Miss Sumners kept it in check from an educational point of view. She is truly a sensible person for Japan. As a teacher, Miss Sumner is very strict. She pointed to the part that the USA, it is easy for a student there to enter a college or university. It is quite different to graduate. Whereas in Japan, it is just the opposite. Although she is sometimes severely critical of the Japanese student, she is called Sum-chan, dear Sum, by her students, and the old graduates have never forgotten Miss Sumners and one of the unforgettable good teachers. Miss Sumners is delighted to receive this honor and wishes to inform her family in the USA of the Japanese governmental decoration. Miss Sumners said, thinking of America and her days in college, it would be a very good thing if they made some honor system and decorations in the USA. Thank you. So, anybody have any questions? How do I get out of this? Okay, Hayne, how do I turn it off? Escape? It's going to escape me everywhere. But I need to go back to them. Okay.
Robin Payne has asked a question. Did Aunt Gert keep journals?
You know, I don't know. We can't find anything. I do have her will, and her will is 30 pages long.
Oh my.
With many little descriptions of all the things that she left for everyone.
Wow.
Yeah, she was very interesting. Great. She actually was, there were 2 things that she particularly loved that when she came back to the United States, she would do 2 things. Sit down in the evening with a good glass of scotch and Walter Cronkite.
Okay.
Walter Cronkite actually went to Charles and Tom Sumners to talk to him whether he would be a good candidate for becoming a priest.
Oh.
And having had the conversation, he decided his calling really was being the reporter that he was. So, but he was very active in the Episcopal Church his entire life. Any other questions?
Not a question, but Joan Gunderson made the comment she thinks she may have attended a service at St. Agnes in Kyoto on a visit.
Very likely, very likely. That is a cathedral, and the school the school now has, I think there are 2 other places where they have churches as well. There's another question.
Yes. What is the Episcopal Church in Japan like now?
I don't know. You know, we don't get a lot of, there are quite a few Japanese people living in the United States as Christians. You know, the bishop who is retiring in Salt Lake City is Japanese. But I don't know that. I do know that what the things I looked at recently about Japan were that the Japanese celebrate 2 things about Christmas and Valentine's, but not as a religious thing, only as a thing for going and buying gifts, and there's a lot of celebration of that, but it has nothing to do with
Right.
Christian move.
Right.
Yeah.
Yane.
May I say something?
Okay.
My name's Fred Hanneman. I've enjoyed many an evening having a scotch with Gertrude in Kyoto.
Oh, good for you.
Wow.
I knew Gertrude from my wife and I were missionaries with the Episcopal Church in Japan from 1958 to 2000.
How cool.
And I knew Gertrude very well.
That's great. So you could answer the question of what Christianity is now in Japan, especially in the Episcopal Church.
Yeah. Do you have 5 hours? It's not an easy question to answer because it's so diversified. You know, at the end of World War II, General MacArthur, who was the commander in chief in the Allied forces and also kind of took the place of the emperor, issued the call to all Christians in America to come to Japan as missionaries to help Japan recover. And so before the war, there were just the major denominations. And after that, it became so diffuse and diversified, which is good in itself, but Christianity no longer had its single goal or a single working relationship together, and it became very split and very different. But the major denominations are still there, but on a much limited basis, because Japan itself has developed so much that the local churches are much more able to take care of themselves. But, you know, Christianity seems to thrive with in problem areas.
Sure.
When you're poor and down and out, you tend to be more interested in Christianity than you do when you're affluent. And as you know, Japan is very affluent today.
Yes.
And Japanese religions have resurged, and people are much less interested in Christianity and much more interested in secularization and treating their religious background more as a cultural background.
Yeah. I did read this. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I could go forever, but No, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt too much.
No,
Well,
I just wondered, because one of the things I did read that there's only 1% of the Japanese are Christian.
That's right. Less than 1%.
Yeah.
But most Japanese are Shinto, which is, they're believers in Shinto, which is a basic native Japanese religion.
Mhm.
And they're also Buddhists, which is an imported religion. Christianity is an imported religion.
Right.
But
William, did you teach at the same school that she taught at?
no, I didn't. The pronunciation of the school is Heian,
Heian, right.
Heian,
Okay.
in the Diocese of Kyoto.
Yeah.
And the name of the doll is Sachiko.
Sachiko.
Yeah, not Sachiko. It's
She always told me
Sachiko.
Sachiko. She is still my favorite thing that I'm amazed that I have managed to keep this doll with
Yeah.
me since I was 4 years old.
That's wonderful. That's
Yeah.
great. Sachiko is a girl's name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Gertrude was a good person. She really did have an influence in Kyoto and at Heian School, Heian, which now is a university.
Yes.
She was there first. It was just a school. And then it
Yeah.
became a high school, and then it became a junior college, and now it has a university. And the Cathedral Church is on the property of the school, and the Kyoto Diocesan Office is there also. So that's a major church in the city of Kyoto. And Kyoto, of course, is the historical and cultural heart of Japan.
Right.
And so to have a major Christian influence is very interesting to have that.
And wasn't the story was the second bomb was supposed to drop on Kyoto, but
That's
they got
correct.
to Nagasaki?
That's right.
Yeah. That would have been devastating
Yeah.
to Japan.
Oh yeah, it would have destroyed the most Japanese culture, which would have really had an adverse effect on Japan.
So there was a question about the picture that I have behind me. That is the temple in Kyoto.
That looks to me, that looks like Heian Shrine,
I think that's right. Yeah.
which is a shrine is Shinto, a temple is
Is
Buddhist.
it Buddhist? Yeah. It's a beautiful building.
I
I
see
want, I'd like to be sure that Robin answers this question that Yane Kim has asked. Has Gertrude been recognized in the Episcopal Church in any way?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It surprises me. But that's one of the reasons that the Episcopal Women's History Project began, because there was a desire to be sure that the women who had given so much, and there was not a lot of attention given to it,
Right.
That's
right.
and so.
And there are many more women who were missionaries in Japan from the United States,
Right.
who were then called deaconesses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There were 4 or 5 of them in Japan before the war, who also did very well. There were the single women, Bible women were more desirable as missionaries than clergy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now as far as I'm aware, there are no long-term appointed missionaries of the Episcopal Church in Japan. There
I don't
are
think so.
short-term youth people, but no.
Yeah.
My wife and I were there for 42 years,
Wow.
and I served as the secretary to the primate in Tokyo.
Cool.
And I worked in the National Church Provincial Office as communications and secretary to the presiding bishop.
May I ask you, William, how you heard about this presentation?
I saw it online. I saw it I'm a member of the Historical Society.
Uh-huh.
Okay, good.
So,
Good.
and I get the journal and all that. So I saw it in one of those outlets, I forget. And when I
Sure.
saw Gertrude's name, I said, whoa, gotta go to
Oh
that.
my goodness.
That's great.
Oh,
I see another person on here who has a connection with Gertrude in Japan. And that's the Reverend Mariah Chelvet, who is on my screen is right under Joanne.
That's great.
That's me. I also told Fred and Eleanor about this since I've been doing the whole series. So
Well, that's
I
great.
grew up as a missionary in Japan. So I would have known Gertrude, but I was 9 when she left. So
Right.
I don't remember
Yes.
knowing her.
Yeah,
But my parents were missionaries. They actually went to Kyoto in 1951, I believe. So, and we probably overlapped with her a little bit. And then, but the missionaries all knew each other. So I'm sure my parents knew her well.
Sure. Yeah, and she went back in 1951
Yeah.
when she came back. So
But I was up in the northern island of Hokkaido, so I was
Yeah.
pretty far away from Kyoto. But my uncle, Beverly Tucker, would have been there. I think that he went down to Kyoto and he taught at Doshisha University and worked there in Kyoto as well. So they would have overlapped as well.
cool.
And there's a message from Kara Wagner Scherer. Hello from Reverend Kevin Seaver, who is the chaplain at St. Luke's Hospital in Tokyo.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that we had a exchange student, his son, and I'm an Episcopal priest, turned out his dad is an Episcopal priest. He's American, but married to a Japanese woman and celebrates in Japanese and lives there. And so I had a little glimpse of the Episcopal Church in Tokyo anyway, from his perspective. But he's kind of the only foreign priest, I think, in Japan right now.
Wow.
No, that's not true. That's not
There's
true.
more, and there's Korean priests too
There are
serving.
many Korean
Yeah.
missionary priests,
Yeah.
but there are other non-Japanese priests
Okay.
in the Nippon Seiko Kai, but are not missionaries.
Right. He's just a regular priest. of the
Kevin
diocese.
I know Kevin, yeah.
Yeah.
He just finished his term as chaplain
Oh.
at the end of March. He
Mhm.
has another assignment.
Ah.
Anyhow, there are lots of stories about women from America in Japan who worked. And one story, I don't know if you have she wrote a book. She was in Kyoto back in 1910 to 30 or something, and wrote a book, which I have, but I gave it out to read to some young people because it's written for young people to know more about Japan back in the 20s and 30s. So she was a deaconess and happened to come from our parish here in St. John's, Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
And what was her name?
I knew you'd ask that. Deaconess Ransom. Deaconess Ransom. Oh, Deaconess Newbold.
I wonder if that book that you're talking about is one that Aunt Gert gave me when I was little, because she gave me quite a few books. I've had more difficult hanging onto the books than to the dolls,
It's
which I
written
have kept with me.
It's written for young people.
Right. That's what I was wondering, if that is that might have had
I
the
think
thing about
it's
girls
the same
stay in it, I bet.
Yeah,
Because that
I think
was
it's the same one.
My goodness, what rich information to add to what Robin has already given
Yeah.
us. And
Well, mine's pretty personal. I mean, it was just, that she was a part of my life, but I
Right,
was
right.
never, but my Robert, my brother-in-law, and after she died, after Aunt Gert died, they went to Japan. Robert was there once when he was in the Navy, but they went back so they could go and see her house. And I think they got to stay in their house when they went to,
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Yeah. Because I think it probably belongs to the Episcopal Church still.
It does.
Yeah.
I remember, yeah, whenever I went to Kyoto, I would be there without fail. Yeah. Gertrude was fun. She was a good gal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Always fun.
Oh,
And
Great.
and on the outside, very stately and proper.
Yes.
But when you got to know her over a scotch, oh,
Yeah. Well, she had this elegance about her.
she was elegant.
Yes,
That's right.
She did.
And she carried herself elegantly.
Absolutely.
And she was very proud of her twin brothers.
Oh yeah. The thing that when I was growing up, I would tell people that the Episcopal Church was very important to my life, but it was in my life. It wasn't me that the church was after me. It wasn't me after the church, because it was there all the time.
There are a lot of people who served in Japan over the years from the United States.
We don't hear a whole lot about that. We hear a whole lot more about the places in Africa, not anti-Africa. I'm not saying that, but just there seems to be better communication from some of those places than there is from Japan.
English is not widespread, although lots of people were there teaching English.
Yeah.
Maybe it's much more nowadays than it used to be, but it was not many people were really easily, conveniently fluent in Japanese. I guess Bev Tucker, Mariah's uncle, was pretty good, but even he sometimes told me that he wasn't quite sure of things. And of course, Bev Tucker's uncle was Henry St. George Tucker, who was the presiding bishop.
Mm.
And he was the bishop of Kyoto, then the bishop of Virginia, then the presiding bishop until 1944. He died in 1958, the year we went to Japan. There are a lot of Tuckers who have had influence in China and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But I could talk for hours. But
Bishop Henry St. George Tucker wrote a book when he came back to the States about his
Silent Shores of Memory.
Yeah, it was a wonderful book, and his story about walking all over Japan to get from one place to another was quite amazing. Quite amazing.
mm.
That's a very good book on the silent shores of memory.
So if you don't mind me speaking up,
Sure.
so I'm the great niece of Henry St. George Tucker, and I'm an Episcopal priest, and I took a sabbatical to look at my family. So I was particularly interested in your stories about Gertrude Sumner, because part of why I'm doing this is because I'm planning to do some writing about my family. So wanted to see how this kind of historical thing is approached. But one of the fun things was I was doing work at Virginia Seminary in their archives, and they have all of Henry St. George Tucker's diaries from when he was bishop. And the archivist said, "It's really strange. Suddenly his handwriting changes in the middle." And I said, "Oh, I'm reading his book, the Silent Shores of Memory, and that's because the Episcopal Church sent him a secretary because his handwriting was so bad." And so this woman named, I can't remember what her name was, she got sent over, and these were bishop's diaries. They weren't personal diaries, and every day she would sit him down and write down everything he did. And that's why the handwriting changed, because she was writing them. And I went and made a copy of the page from his book so that they could put it in the files, so that when the next person came along and had no idea why this was going on, they would know. So I think it's fun how you can kind of have history kind of learning, and it's all a process. So I'm so glad that Fred was able to be on with Fred and Eleanor so that they could share some stories.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
And we all learned together.
Looked up Deaconess Newbold, and she was at Fukushima. That was her base, north of about 160 miles from Tokyo, according to the Living Church Annual.
And since we were name dropping, I should mention that my father was Bill Eddy, in case anybody's ever heard of that name.
Okay.
He went on to be rector in Christ Church in Tarrytown when we came back to the States.
Well, we are at time, and I just think that this has just been so rich. I mean, Robin, you got us certainly started, but the additions have
Great,
really been
absolutely.
great too. So
Yes, yes.
you all will need to get on a Zoom together and really flesh all this out, huh?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for the Episcopal Women's History Project's Lenten series. I'm sad to see them end. I think they have just been such rich presentations. And so I wish you all a wonderful Holy Week and Easter. And, maybe, who knows, we may be back next year. Please consider joining EWHP. We'd love to have you. And I know Yane has put some information on the chat room how to do this, as well as these are on YouTube. EWHP has a YouTube page, and so all the talks are on this YouTube site. So
And if people want to join, they can go to the Facebook page and also to the website and just click on join us. Simple.
Absolutely. Well, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks
Thanks
be
be
to
to
God.
God.
Thank you, Robin.
Sure. Thanks for you. It's just something really I would like to see people know more about what she did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then some of the other women.
Exactly. Great. Thank
Very
you. Thank you for
interesting.
being there. Great.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Sure.